So now we can grab our beam and let's just drop a postage stamp node over here and go over all the way up to the top and look at our beam render, and I will hold down shift and also select this. So now both my postage stamp node is selected and this beam render, and I will just hit Alt and Y to create a connection between these. Now I can press Alt H, so this will be my render. And for this beam, I actually want to use this as a 2D card texture. So from here, I want to drop down a card geometry node. And in order to know where to place this geometry, I exported the terrain geometry and I will just bring it over from my original chain, which is going to be this Regio. Let's bring this over here. And if I preview this, it's going to be our terrain geometry. And to optimize things a little bit, I actually just cut it off towards the top here because we only really need this very top portion here. So from here, let's also bring in our camera that we had earlier. So our 3D camera. And I'll copy paste this here. So now I can drop down a scanline render and I will point the cam to my camera and I want to merge these two together. So let's drop down a scene node and merge these two here, and this will be my OBJ scene. So if I were to preview this result now, we can see our beam all the way over here. So I can grab this card, let's adjust things a little bit. I can grab this card and I will just move this up to be right on top of our beam, and we can also go in our 3D view, and since this peak of the geometry is right in the origin of our scene, so it's 0, 0, 0, we only really need to adjust the Y value for our 2D card. Let's maybe just increase the scale to a value of 10, and let's go back to our render and see what we get. Okay, so now this is placed in the 3D space, and we can go ahead and from here I will just merge this into our chain. And I will set the operation to plus. Now we also get the texture from the geometry. So to turn our geometry completely black, I will drop down a constant with RGB set to 0 and assign it as the texture for my mountain. So now essentially, if I look at my scanline render, we are still obscuring the beam with the geometry, but we are not seeing the geometry since it's completely black, which works out great if we are using the plus blending mode. We might want to go ahead and for this card, we can fine tune the translation values here. So maybe I want to bring it over slightly to the right, and I think this should be fine. Maybe I'll bring this slightly up and maybe increase the uniform scale a couple of units and up. So I want to make sure that this just slightly extends towards the regions of this center for the clouds here. So I might want to scale a little bit and just bring this up. So maybe 14 and let's try 50. It's up. Okay, so now what we have to do is we can create a roto shape to mask out the beam here to blend it better with our sky. So for this, I will press O. So let's create a shape here at the last frame. Let's do something like this. And I will add a keyframe for this shape and maybe go at around frame 30. And let's adjust this to our sky. And let's go in between. Maybe also adjust this here and just check some other frames. Make sure that this is looking, this shape is where it should be. So now I will drop down a blur node with B, and I just want to increase this to maybe 100. And we can actually just go ahead and create a copy node with K and copy the alpha to our scanline. And if I use the premol now, we will be able to fade this out towards the top here. And we can drop down a grade node, which is going to be set to alpha. And if I play around with the gain, we can see that we can push this further down. If I look at what's happening here with the grade, we can see now that we are just squeezing the values in a little bit. And we can, of course, still adjust the blurring here, so the fade. Let's look at our result. So maybe I want to also play around with this gray node for the alpha, maybe increase the black point a little bit. So I think this is fading in nice. Maybe check some other frames as well. Okay, I think this is looking good. So this will be the base for our beam. Let's maybe make some room. And any adjustments we want to make to this render here will be updated in our final look. So what I want to do here is I want to create an additional smoke layer on top of this. So I will grab down a blur node and assign it to our render. And let's check this out. Let's maybe just increase this to 100. Drop down a saturation node. And let's make this white. So drop down the saturation. And with a gray node, I will just gain this up quite a bit. Over to the right, let's create a noise. And let's make sure that this is the same format as our render, which is going to be the 700 by 1000. So if I drop down a reformat node, I should be able to find my new resolution over here at the bottom. So let's select this and let's assign our node to this reformat. So it's now the same size as our render. In the transform options, let's maybe first adjust the size here a little bit. And I want to animate this noise in the Z space, so I'll hit equals on my keyboard. And for the expression here, let's do frame divided by maybe 50. So a rather slow evolution. Okay, and I also want to maybe translate this in the Y direction to sort of match the direction of our beam. So for the Y value here in the translate, I will also hit equals and say maybe frame multiply by, let's say 20. And let's check this. Okay, maybe this will be good. And now if I multiply these values, let's see what we get. So this will be sort of our element that we add on top of our beam. So let's drop down a merge here and let's just set the operation here to plus. Okay, so from over this multiply, I can of course drop down again, maybe a gamma and another gray node, and let's make this blue match our beam. So maybe something like this. We can of course go back to our blur here, and maybe we might want to increase the gamma, increase the gain and the multiply, play around with some of these settings. But something like this should be fine, and maybe just drop the overall gain down. So now this will also update in our main chain. So if I check this out, we can slightly see it here. Maybe I can bring this up a little bit. It's more. Okay, so maybe something like this. Okay, so we have this nice bluish haze around it, which is kind of like smoke. So finally for this beam, I also want to create some glows from this. So let's drop down a crop after our pre-mult, maybe adjust these nodes. So now with this crop, we can drop our AP glow, and let's create a couple of layers of glow. The first one will be rather small and localized one. So maybe I just want to drop the persistence a little bit. And let's play around with some of these settings to get something more sharper and a little bit more contrast. So this will be fine. Let's drop a merge and edit here for our chain. Set the operation to plus. And finally, let's add an extra layer of glow. So I will just duplicate this and also merge this here. And for this node, let's do a plus. And for this glow, let's do a big spread for this. Increase the persistence quite a bit, but drop down the intensity and increase the response time, and maybe increase the persistence. Let's do something like this. And maybe we can also increase the intensity a bit and drop down a blur. Blur this even more, and let's take a look. Okay, so we can see that with the second layer of glow, we kind of add a little bit more of a global brightness effect. So we can maybe go back to our, let's go back here to the color of this smoke and just introduce a little bit more, something like this. And also for our main beam render, we might want to add a render, and I can also play around with the colors here. So I want to use the blue as well. So we can see that we get an overall more blue haze around it. Maybe I can just drop down something like this. Okay. So this will be our beam, and for the final touches, what I want to do is I will maybe add a little bit of blur towards the edges here. So let's drop down a roto shape with O, and let's maybe just grab the circular, or rather the ellipse shape, and while holding down Control, I'll just scale this up. Maybe do something like this, and of course with a blur this up maybe to a size of 200, and I'm gonna use an iBlur node which I got from Nukepedia. This is a really cool blur node which you can add a mask to. So if I assign the mask here and increase the blur, let's maybe invert the alpha here, so drop down and invert. We can see we have this nice blur over here towards the edges, and I will just drop this down. Let's set this to defocus, maybe just increase this a little bit. So this might still be a little bit too much. Just decrease this. We just want to add just a little bit of blur. Maybe let's use a value of 5. So this will help our view, or rather our focus, to be right in the center of our screen. And finally, we can use the same roto shape with a blur. Let's Alt-C to duplicate these, and let's drop down a grade node and assign this as our mask. And let's drop down the gain. And let's invert our mask. So with this, we can do a really quick vignette effect. We just drop this down a little bit, and we can, of course, adjust our shape for the roto. And maybe also before these two effects, let's drop down a grade, and I might just want to increase maybe, or rather decrease our gamma. So just increase the contrast a little bit overall, maybe the gain. Okay, so something like this. Alright, so with the finishing touches done, this will basically complete our comp and our entire effect. So in the next video, what I want to do is I want to go over my original comp layer by layer and make sure that I didn't forget anything. But if I compare the results here, this is the original and this is what we recreated. So we can see that these are very similar. The only difference really is that I spent for this a little bit more time fine tuning each grade node and the colors and everything. But these essentially follow the exact same structure. So in the next video, let's go quickly over the original comp.